So, as I think most of you know, the government climbed down yesterday afternoon, so this is partly a victory celebration and partly a complaint about what they didn't do. But they backed down yesterday on a number of the items. They adopted the tame recommendations from their tame senators, and they also did something that the Senate didn't recommend. They backed down on vouching. They don't want to admit that they backed down on vouching, so they're not using the word. But what they've done is they've said that if you don't have ID with address, you can get somebody else in the poll to vouch for you, to vouch for your address. So they're reinstating vouching if you don't have address on your ID. But they don't want to admit that they backed down on vouching, so they're trying to use a different word for it, which is a good sign, because that means that they're embarrassed about backing down. So I'm not afraid to say that they climbed down. That's good. What's missing is the powers to investigate things like the robocalls. So I'll give you a couple of comments from others. From Craig Scott, the NDP critic. He says, despite their stubbornness, Conservatives have now agreed to bring forward major amendments to their bill. The government's concessions start to address some of the concerns raised by the NDP and many experts. New Democrats will continue to fight for amendments to empower Elections Canada to compel documents and witnesses, which is why the robocalls couldn't be prosecuted, to keep big money out of politics by maintaining donation limits, and to maintain Election Canada's freedom to promote voting. To substantiate that, I'll give you a quote from an article in the Hill Times by their reporter, so this is not a partisan quote. When the investigation into the robocalls came out, that after a 3-year investigation they found insufficient evidence of widespread attempts to mislead voters with fraudulent telephone calls. But the reporter says, this report nonetheless supports calls to beef up the Federal Election Commissioner's investigative powers, say opposition MPs. Opposition MPs say the report's finding of obstacles that delayed or prevented progress in specific cases supports arguments that Bill C-23, the government's overhaul of the Canada Elections Act, should include a provision to give the Elections Commissioner the power to compel testimony through a judge while investigating allegations of wrongdoing during elections. Quote, Elections Canada has been saying since the robo-fraud case that they did not have the tools that they needed to be able to investigate, to compel witnesses, and then we see the Conservative Party's attack on Elections Canada, which is in fact an attack on their credibility in the wake of the attempts by Elections Canada to investigate, said NDP MP Charlie Angus from Timmins. I'll give you one more quote from an article in the Globe and Mail a couple days ago by Duff Conacher. He said, even if Bill C-23's unfair measures are changed, other measures will still be needed to correct the unfair and undemocratic flaws in the current federal election system. First, federal election watchdogs should have the right to any document they request to confirm compliance with the Elections Act, as watchdogs do in several provinces. And secondly, the current federal election voting system should be changed to ensure that the number of politicians each political party elects is based upon the voter support each party receives. So it's nice to see that being printed in the Globe and Mail, and I think that's a point that needs to be hammered, because as I have been saying for the last couple of years, the winner-take-all voting system is the biggest voter suppression scheme of them all. It throws half our votes in the garbage. So those are the things that I have to say. Kim?
Oh, thanks, Will. Will. Just a couple of things. Wilf always does such a fantastic job of research and making sure everybody is on top of what is the most current, shall we say, version of what's coming out. Because it has been a number of versions, certainly from this government. I think for me the most important thing, and certainly from what I'm hearing from constituents, is that Elections Canada still does not have the ability to compel the testimony of witnesses. And it was clear in the Robocall investigation, and yes, Guelph is separate and that is going forward separately, but it clearly was a case of it wasn't that there necessarily wasn't evidence, it's that they couldn't get the evidence because they have no power. And I believe certainly the federal government's position that, the police can't do that and other people can't do that. I don't think that's relevant. This is our democratic system. It's the core of our not just our democracy, but I think our vision as a nation for what's right and what we should be able to expect from the Charter and those people who run our government. And I think finally it is about the way in which this whole thing was handled. It is a pattern that we've seen over the past 8 years of putting things out there, and retreating may be a really good word, because they certainly have not taken it back, but they've retreated. And it speaks the style of divisive policy that Harper and his government has. He wanted the conversation to be about people who disagreed with each other, rather than finding some common ground that people could agree on. And I think this bill was a perfect example of that, because what you heard was Pierre Poilievre going around the circuit in terms of media and basically saying people like Sheila Fraser and Marc Meron and Mr. Neufeld are well-respected individuals with no partisan bone in their body. And he went around, for want of a better term, bashing their credibility and the work that they've done for us as Canadians. And when a minister of our crown takes personal cheap shots at people like that, the disrespect, he's showing disrespect for us and disrespect for people that have done huge things for our country. So I won't go on any more about that, except to say that I think this is just one of many examples we continue to see of policies and logs out into the electorate of things they want us to fight about. And I think Will said it really well when we were talking earlier, that this really is about them trying to find a way through the Senate of trying to make it look like this was all a new idea. It wasn't. It was orchestrated. There is no question in anyone's mind that this whole lead up and this whole setup was to the Senate coming back and saying, oh, well, we're going to recommend a few things. I don't know of anyone who actually believed that was true. So I think the message here is we have to stop letting them divide us. And we have to start as a community, as a riding, as a country, of finding things that unite us and moving forward on those things. So thank you very much.
Here, here.
Anyone else have anything they want to
Like CBC.
add? Nobody? Okay, well, as I said at the beginning, this is partly a victory party and partly a
Still work to do.
complaint of
Keep at it.
of slow work to be done. So
Absolutely.
if that's all anyone has to say, then thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Here, here.
And I don't know how we get Mr. Norlock to show up, but just because the office is closed doesn't mean to say he couldn't have come.
Scared.